How are you this evening? I'm Carol Roble. I'm a representative of the Adult Education Committee here at Union Church, and I have some really good news and a little bit of bad news. The bad news is that the Cubs did not clinch today their berth. The good news is I think you're in for a very, very fun evening this evening, and a very enlightening evening as well. And I'm glad you could join us. This is part of our series this year for our adult education.
Feel right at home.
A just conversation moving toward economic equality. It's jointly sponsored this evening by Christian Education, Christian Social Justice, and the Mission Ministries. And this evening, we will be talking with the Reverend Dr. Michael Pfleger. He's going to be discussing with us economic inequality and how do we respond as Christians as well. So if I could just give you a little bit of background about Father Pfleger.
Just my name is fine. I'm good. I need anything.
Sorry, I can't do that. As you may be aware, Reverend Father Pfleger here is a Roman Catholic priest and a social activist in Chicago. He is the recipient of numerous awards and honors for the work he continues to perform in the areas of human rights and social justice. He's served the predominantly African-American parish of St. Sabina since 1971, and at age 31, he was the youngest full pastor to be appointed by the Chicago Archdiocese. He's a passionate leader who champions for equality and justice both in his community and beyond. Under Father Pfleger's leadership, St. Sabina has established a number of social agencies, including the Employment Resource Center, the ARC Youth Center, the St. Sabina Social Service Center, the Thea Bowman Advanced Spiritual Center, the Samaritan House for the Homeless, St. Sabina 80-Unit Village for Elders, and the Beloved Community Incorporated. Tonight, Father Pfleger will share his work that he's done in his parish and community, his vision for social and economic justice, and ideas on how we as Christians can respond to this issue. So it is my great pleasure to present to you this evening Father Michael Pfleger.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Carol, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here this evening. Thank you also for changing the night. I was supposed to be originally last night, and Carol was wonderful enough to change it because I had an opportunity to sit in the Congress yesterday when the Holy Father was there and listen to the Pope. And it's not often that I find a Pope I can quote, so when I find one, I wanted to take advantage of it because I love this man and what he's standing for. It's just as a voice for the poor and a voice for justice and a voice of reaching out rather than judgment and condemnation. So I laugh now because for years and years I would always get a very conservative group of people that would always every week tell me I better do what the Pope says. And now I'm telling them, you better do what the Pope says. And they're all telling me that the Pope is wrong. Now all of a sudden he was wrong. When I thought the Pope was wrong, I was a heretic. So, but it's good to be able to, I love this man and I love the message that he's bringing. I want also just recognize Paul Hoffman, who's been a good friend and gotten our kids tickets every year for one of the Notre Dame games to go down there. It's good to see you, Paul. And of course, Dick Johnson, who has, we've met and worked together in various times throughout the years, and just somebody I have a lot of respect for. There's not a lot of people in the news business I have a lot of respect for, but Dick is one of them, so it's so good to see you, sir. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about kind of economic and just the inequality and injustice from my standpoint for maybe about 4.5 hours, then we'll open it up for questions, if that's all right with everybody. Everybody, I think, is quite aware and knows well the Gospel of Luke, the 10th chapter, the familiar story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus tells an expert of the law the call to love God and to love your neighbor. The question is then asked, well, who is my neighbor? It's always a tricky thing, you know. Well, who's my neighbor? In other words, who's the one I have to love? And so I know who I don't have to love. But Jesus does not fall into the trap, and in fact, he gives them a parable. And the parable talks about a man on his way to Jericho, as we all know, and he's beaten up, and he is robbed, and he's left half dead on the side of the road. And then we're told that both the Levite and the priest saw him and walked to the other side and ignored him and passed him by. Jesus says in the parable that a Samaritan stops to help and to restore and to save the man from death. The Levite tries to help him and bring him back on his feet. Now, certainly we could understand why the Levite and why the priest may have walked to the other side. Number one, it was going to demand time of them. Two, it could have demanded cost of them. It made it cost them something. It did cost the Samaritan to bring the man back to healing, and he said, whatever it costs, I'll pay for. It could have cost them not only an interruption of their agenda, but also it could have cost them danger, because maybe the one that beat this man up was still out there and could beat them up. So I can understand the question, why would they? But Dr. King said that our job as Christians is not to ask what it would cost me, but the question really is, what if I don't help the man? What's going to happen to him? What's going to happen to my brother? What's going to happen to my sister if I don't help them? That's the Christian response we have to look at. Now, I'm certainly this man watched the Levite and watched the priest go by and saw them, and then not only watched them cross over on the other side, but I'm certain the question probably raised on that Levite, on that man beaten up mind, does anybody care about me? The Levite walked by. The priest walked by. Does anybody care about my situation and my circumstance? That really brings back to me a question I heard in a town hall meeting in Englewood, not this past summer, but a summer ago. It was a town hall meeting about the community, about the violence and what's going on in the city, and the mayor was there at the town hall meeting. He'd gone through all the questions, the answer was just about to end, and this one young kid raised his hand and he said, I have one more question. And somebody said, no, it's over now, son, just wait. We're finished for this evening, next time. And he said, no. Well, the mayor said, go ahead, you ask your question. And the young man raised his hand and he said, I just have one question I want to ask you. And he says, does anybody care about me? Does anybody care about us? Does anybody care about what's going on in my neighborhood? It's a painful and it's a haunting question for a young teenager anywhere. For a child to ever wonder, does anybody care about me? Does anybody think about me? Does anybody wonder about me? Does anybody know that I exist or what I'm going through? In recent years, maybe the last 2 or 3 years, and we keep hearing the story come back up from out in Indiana, there was this thing that's gone on in Chicago and gone in Indiana and gone around the country of this thing called sinkholes. And sinkholes is where literally have swallowed up cars and swallowed up some house. One man, remember, was in his bed and it swallowed him up, and the young kid out at the dunes out in Indiana was swallowed up in the sinkhole, and they were just swallowed up by the circumstances around them. Well, I guess one of the things I want to share with you tonight in the society that we're living today is that there's a lot of young men and women and neighbors and communities who have been swallowed up by sinkholes. Not sinkholes of some shifting of the earth or caved-in street, but sinkholes of a society in a world in which we live today that is abandoned and neglected. Sinkholes of a society that is almost designed and created sinkholes for some folks and for some communities to fall apart. And just like the man on the Jericho road, the sinkholes of situations and circumstances and structures in our world today have caused a whole lot of people to be on the side of life's road and feel like they've been left to die, while society seems to walk by and ignore them. And a whole lot of people, adults and elders and young people and little children, are asking the same question: does anybody care about us? We understand that we're living in a day today where we have sinkholes of enormous unemployment. It is amazing to me when I hear about the news come out and say, well, America's unemployment is 5.1%. When I hear that America's unemployment is 5.1%, what it tells me is I don't live in America. Because in Auburn, Gresham, where I live, or Englewood, which is 3 blocks away, the unemployment there is somewhere between 25 to 34%. Sinkholes of people that say they want a job, they want to get an opportunity to work, but there's no place to go and there's no jobs available. So unemployment becomes a norm in the community that I live in. I agree and will continue to fight for an increasing of the minimum wage. It's a right fight. Frankly, it's an embarrassing that 47 years after Dr. King was killed in Memphis while fighting for a living wage for some sanitation workers, 47 years later, we're still fighting for a living wage. Something's wrong about that kind of mentality, that somebody has to fight for a wage so they can take care of their family or take care of their house or pay expenses. I have an enormous amount of people that are working full-time jobs and sometimes 2 jobs and can't keep their apartments and can't keep their lights on and can't keep feeding their children. But the reality is, whether it's $10 or $15 or $20 an hour, if you still can't get a job, then doesn't make any difference what the minimum wage is to you, because you're just trying to survive day in and day out. And I hear this, one of the candidates running for president, Dr. Ben Carson, say, well, people just got to pull them up by their bootstraps. But you got to have some straps to pull yourself up by. And when you have nothing and no doors open and no place to turn, unfortunately, a job is not an opportunity that you can find very easily in my neighborhood. When I hear Motorola coming into downtown, my first response is, how many of those jobs will be offered in my community, in my neighborhood? When I hear about new corporations moving in Chicago, I'm asking how many will come and hire in this neighborhood and in this community. We run an employment center. And for every 1 job we have, there's 100 people trying to get it. We just quietly said we were going to do a thing for Walmart opening up on 76 in Ashland about a year ago, and we said we were having some job openings that we're going to hire 200 people. We had 2,500 people show up in 2 days for the 200 jobs. We had an Uber job thing just the other day at St. Sabina, and 350 people showed up, and we didn't even advertise it. So the unemployment situation is a sinkhole that a lot of our brothers and sisters are falling into. We have another sinkhole in America that we continue to deny, and that's the education system in America. And I tell you, brothers and sisters, being an old man like myself, I've been around long enough to know it's not a Democratic problem, it's not a Republican problem, it's both and. Because both Democrats and Republicans have failed to give public education to every child that deserves it in America. No child should go to school and go day in and day out and not be able to read at the end of that school day. When I adopted my first son, he was at King School, now King Prep, as it's been a turnaround. When I adopted him, it was in sophomore year of high school. And one night we were sitting around the table at a youth meeting, and the Bible was being passed around to read the Bible, and it came to my son Jarvis, and Jarvis took the Bible and he stared at it, and then he threw the Bible down and he ran out and ran to his room, and I went chasing after him. He was beating a hole in the wall, and it took me 3 hours for Jarvis to say to me, Dad, I can't read. Because I didn't know the school that he was into at that time was doing all the social promoting just to get kids out and get funding, but never taught my son to read. It wasn't that my son couldn't read, because I got him a tutor and put him in Leo High School, and within 6 months he was reading at grade level. But he just never had the opportunity or the choice to learn how to read. The failed education system that goes on in Chicago that too often depends upon your zip code or your race or where you live is the kind of school that you can go to. I know that a lot of people got mad at me in the last big strike with schools in Chicago because I wouldn't jump with the board and I wouldn't jump with the union. They said, well, who are you with? And I said, I'm not with either of you. I said, because I'm with the kids. And while we're fighting all these union issues and while we're fighting all the board issues, I said, where's the voice that is fighting for our children and fighting for our kids? Because it doesn't really make any difference to me whether a child is homeschooled or goes to parochial school or a private school or a public school or a charter school. I just want a kid to be able to go to a good school where he or she can get the talents and the gifts that are inside of them developed so they can reach their goals. We so often talk in the Catholic Church about right to life and the sin of abortion. We beat our people up all the time talking about the sin of abortion. I'm so glad the new Pope says, let's get off of that and stop judging people. Let's just love people. But you know, abortion, if we really believe the Scriptures, and the Scriptures tell us that every child is born with a purpose and a destiny and a divine plan, then whenever a child cannot reach his or her destiny, in my mind, that's a form of abortion. So when we don't educate our children, that's a form of abortion. When our children can't get a job as adults, that's a form of abortion. When they can't come into the fullness of who they are with their gifts and their talents, that's a form of abortion. And we're doing that in America all the time, but all we want to talk about is a womb in a clinic and not talk about a society that does not let our children grow up and become the men and women God called them to be. And that's an abortive thing that we don't talk about anymore. It's time to make sure that every one of our children are able to get the education that we say as this country they have a right to get as American citizens. It's time that we let our children understand that we love them enough to take the gifts and the talents God already put in them and develop it to become their best. Yes, masses of our sisters and brothers are being swallowed up in sinkholes and are crying, does anybody help us? Does anybody care about us? We look at the incarceration system of our country. It is amazing to me to look back now and say 12% of the United States population is African American, but 44% of the African Americans are in some kind of incarceration. 12% of the population African American, 13% of the government says of the drug users are African American. The government says 13% of drug users are African Americans, but 74% of those arrested for drugs are African Americans. Why is that? Why do we have such a lopsided of who we arrest and who we put into incarceration in this country? And then it isn't bad enough that when a person comes out of jail or comes out of prison, done their time, then we continue to mark them for life. And they can't get housing, they can't get tuition assistance, they can't get a job. There was a young man that came to me about 6 months ago. I had been watching him, came out of prison about a year ago, was going to interview after interview. He sat at our employment center every day on the internet. I would give him bus fare to go to job interview. He tried everything, a great guy, good guy, who got caught up in the Clinton 3 strikes and you're out and got arrested for that with a small drug charge, had this now on him, and as a result of that, had been marked for life. He finally got a call to this one place he'd been trying to. He knew he could do this job. He knew he'd be great at it. He went down to the man and finally got an appointment with the man after pushing and got into the man's office, and the man for 10 minutes berated him. For 10 minutes, the man looked at him and he said, "Why should I hire you? You made a choice and went to jail for selling drugs. Why should I give you a choice? There's too many people that never made choices like you made. So why should I waste my time taking care of you? I need to take care of those that didn't make those decisions and didn't go to jail." And he went on for 10 minutes berating him and finally said, "So just now I wanted you to know why I won't hire you." And the guy got up and took his hand, and the guy said, "You know, sir, it hasn't been easy for me to sit here and listen to you berate me for the last 10 minutes, but I've been trying to do the right thing for the last 7 months. I've gone to 100 interviews, and I pursued this one because I know I could do this job and I could be good at it and I could be an asset to your company. I tried to do the right thing, sir, but all you did for 10 minutes is berate me. I could have just sat by your car and waited for you to rob you." And the guy opened his mouth and said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Because that's what happens when you don't get any right choices. When you don't get any opportunities, you take the lowest form of common denominator because you're going to survive at one time or another. So we take people that come out of jail and then we tell them, don't return, don't go back to prison, but we don't give them any chances or opportunities to get a job and to turn their life around. The God that I serve is a God of second chances. I know I'm about 150,000 on my second chances. I don't know about anybody else in here. But I thank God for the second chances in my life. I've been suspended twice. And my God, I got a lot of second chances. But we don't give second chances to too many of our young people who find themselves then left to the masses of the streets. So many of our sisters and brothers left in sinkholes of poverty in this country that keeps masses of men and women and children shackled in oppression. And now the gap between the rich and the poor is seemingly getting greater and greater and brought right before our eyes on our watch, and nothing seems to be happening to it. The question I keep asking myself, because 2 to 3 days a week when I wake up and go down to my office at 6 o'clock in the morning, in my front doorway is some young brother between 17 and 21 sleeping on my doorway. One, because he feels safe there. 2, because he's begging for some food to eat that day. I can't even tell you in a given week how many people I give food to who have nothing to eat, mothers and their children, or young men, because young men, when they're 17, 18, 19, their mother or their father or their grandmother loses their apartment, they tell them, well, you're on your own. I'm sleeping on a couch at my sister's house. You're on your own. You've got to find a way, and put them out, and then they have no place to go and no place to turn. We talk about the unemployment and poverty, how it's so connected. Last summer at St. Sabina, we had 1,150 at-risk youth we gave jobs to for the summer. One of their agreement was they could not be involved in any negative activity, any criminal activity, any arrest. Of 1,150 of them, not one of them got fired from a job. Not one of them were in any criminal activity that entire summer. But this summer we had 330 jobs to offer. And people after people could come and say, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to work? Of that 1,150, we got 200 of them full-time jobs, got hired after their job. But we have a governor, and I know where I'm at, but I'll be careful. But we have a governor who cut all youth employment programs. A governor who could cut all anti-violence prevention programs. And so our programs of anti-violence, we had to do with volunteers this summer. Our anti-violence program, we had to go and get people to donate money to try to hire somebody for working $5 an hour. We paid people just to have some kind of income for 10 to 15 hours a week, because all those programs were wiped out by the state. And every time I realize how many people are suffering from poverty, every time I realize how many young people we have in a building across the street, I have 3 people right now in a studio who are sleeping on sleeping bags in a studio to have someplace to stay. I have 2 people who sleep on the floor of my room every night because we're still trying to find them someplace to stay. And I wonder myself sometimes, when do we be comfortable as a nation? When do we be comfortable and indifferent with the poor? When did it become all right for people to have to live under viaducts? When did it become all right in America for people to live in abandoned buildings and wonder where their next meal was to come from? And it seems like we've gotten a nation that's become comfortable with poverty and comfortable with some not making it every night. I remember one of the homeless people down in Lower Wacker, because I bring my folks to realize there's somebody worse than you, and twice a month we go down and bring a little that we have to feed those in Lower Wacker and on Canal Street and in Canalport. And I remember one night talking to a young man down there, and he says, Father Mike, he says, I understand, he said, people don't have anything to give me when I'm standing at a stoplight or standing at a corner and I'm begging for some money to get food to eat that day. He said, I understand that. He said, let me tell you what really bothers me, though. So what bothers me when they see me walking down to the car, he said, and they're looking at me and they're watching me come, and then all of a sudden I get to their window and they look to the empty seat next to them like they're talking to somebody, to ignore looking at me. The man said to me, I don't care if people say to me, I have nothing to give you. He said, I don't care if people say that, God bless you, I'll pray for you. I said, I don't care if people just say, get away from my car. I don't care what they say to me. He's the only thing that bothers me is when they ignore me like I'm invisible. Just don't make me feel like I'm invisible. He said, there's not a worse feeling in the world than to feel like you are an invisible person that nobody even knows or cares if you exist. Mother told me one time that she had applied for a job, and they said the only way she could apply was online. She said, Father Mike, could I come in your office and use your computer? I said, sure. She said, because they told me I have to apply online. She says, I'm trying to keep food on my table. I'm trying to keep the lights on so my children can do homework. I don't have internet. That's a luxury for me. So when people tell me to apply online, she says, I have nothing to go to. I had last Thanksgiving and last Christmas, over 10 families came to cook their Thanksgiving turkey that we gave them in our stove because they didn't have any gas for their stove. It sometimes amazes me that we live in this country where people are hurting so much, where people are stressed out so much, and they don't seem to have any place to turn. Dr. King one time taught a great parable about the young man Dives and Lazarus. Remember that, the rich man? And Lazarus was sitting at his door. And Lazarus came every day begging at his door, and Dives ignored him and went by and went to be fine. And finally, Dives died and Lazarus died. And it said Lazarus went up to the bosom of Abraham and Dives went to hell. And the question always often asked is, well, what, did Dives go to hell because he was so rich? No. God's not against rich. God's not against money. What he went to hell for is that he didn't care. He didn't care that there was somebody right at his door hurting, and he was able to get comfortable enough walking by him every day and ignore that he even existed. We live in a sinkhole right now of violence in this country. I can't go anywhere in America where people don't say to me, how in God's name are people living on the south side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago with the violence as it is? Last weekend, 9 killed, 49 shot in a weekend. Last night, I think there was 1 killed and 14 shot on a Thursday night. You say, well, why is there this violence? Well, I've never seen such hopelessness. I've never seen such, in 40 years at St. Sabina, I've never seen more poverty than I see right now. In 40 years at St. Sabina, I've never seen unemployment being as bad as it is right now. And in 40 years at St. Sabina, I've never seen more guns available than it is right now. I have never found I live in a day where it's easier to get a gun than a computer in my neighborhood. And the violence becomes a desperateness of hopelessness. And so when I can't find any other way to survive, guns become my street credibility, when I can rob somebody or when I can shoot at somebody, because it makes me feel big about myself because I have nothing else going for myself. But I also know that we can stop this violence. 4 years ago, we were out on a Friday night. We would go out every Friday night at my church, so I told them, we're going to go out and find out, because we had one of the most violent beats in the city of Chicago. I said, we're going to go out every Friday night. The commander said the most violent time in this neighborhood is Friday nights, starting at 9 o'clock to 4 in the morning. So I told my church, the next Sunday, we're going to start going out every Friday night. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, and if anything happens to me, you're all responsible, because you left me out there by myself. We start going out every Friday night, and I would ask the commander every Friday afternoon, where was there been any violence or tension in the neighborhood? This is where we're going. This is where we're going to go this Friday night. So we would go out every Friday night and just talk to people, not condemning, not judging, just talking, telling young brothers, what do you need? Where you're at? Somebody needs food. Somebody needs a place to stay. How we can help them. That particular Friday night, we were on a porch over at a place that I don't like to call them gangs. I like to call them organizations. But there was one group over there, a gang on a porch. And I said to the group, I said, there's 4 main gangs in this neighborhood. I said, do you think that possibly we could bring everybody together and we could have a basketball game? And the guys looked at me and said, no, somebody will get killed, somebody will get shot. We can't do that. Isaiah Thomas happened to be with us that night. Isaiah said, I'm in. I thought, you're stupid. But Isaiah says he's in. So the kids said, well, we kept talking. So, all right, well, he's in, and you get the other groups, then we'll be in too, but we have to know we're safe. We tried, and we went all of the rest of that summer going to every different group. At the same time, Joaquin Noah called me up, and he said, Mike, I don't know a thing about violence. My dad's a tennis player. Is that me? The cardinal's still alive. I don't believe anything happened to him. He said, my dad's a tennis player, but I want to help. I said, we're talking about a basketball game. You're right on target. You play basketball. And so we began to set this thing up, and we brought the guys together. And everybody was going to support us at the first point, and then everybody, as time went on, dropped out. The police said, we want nothing to do, it's going to be a bloodbath. The city backed out, so we want nothing to do with it. The church backed out. Other churches in the neighborhood backed out. Everybody said, this is going to fail, we'll have nothing to do with it. But see, I'm a praying guy, and I had really prayed about this, and God, if this is your thing, make it happen. If it's not, block it, whatever you got to do. And he was opening these doors, and things were happening. Joachim called, the guys said they were willing to do it. So I thought, well, I got to do this now. So I told him, one of my favorite prayers to God is when I really prayed and I really believe he's telling me to do something, all right, I'm going to do this, God, and if this fails, you're going to look really bad because I told everybody this is your idea. And so we went ahead and we had it. Everybody backed off. We had 2,000 people in our gym and 4 different gangs. And it was filled with 4 different gangs. Not one single incident, not one single problem. And at the end of it, we went down to talk with some of the NBA players, Danny Crawford from the NBA refs, and Jim Capers and Mark Davis, NBA refs. They said, we want to ref the game. So NBA refs, and NBA players coach, and the kids played. And not a single Wednesday after we went down to talk in the hall, and guys started crying, saying, I don't want to die, I just want to live. Can you help us? So I told them, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start a tournament and a league now that runs every Monday night. And we're going to meet before, we're going to feed you every Monday, and we're going to care for you every Monday, and we're going to do whatever we can to help you survive. And you're going to tell us what you need. In the 4 years, we put 200 people through GED classes. We got 60 people in full-time jobs. Right now, we have about 20 people off in college or junior college going to school. And the best thing about it, Ben, has moved from 4 teams to 8 teams. And a year ago, we said, no more gang has a team. We're doing a draft. So on any given team, there's 5 or 6 different gangs represented on a team. So, I'm sorry, what's your name, sir?
Bob.
Bob. So if Bob is a GD and I'm a Stone, and what's your name, sir?
Jim.
Jim is another Stone, but you're a GD, and say, hey, you my brother. We together, we're in the same gang. But Bob plays better ball than you. So Bob, I need you on my team. And we watched it grow, and we watched people come together who had all this rivalry in the street, who were shooting each other in the street, and now they're playing ball, and unconsciously the relationships were breaking down, and kids were getting to know each other and take care of each other, so that if I see Bob in the street and we're in a different gang, and somebody says, we need to get him, he's over in our territory, and we found gang members saying, no, give him a pass, I play ball with him. And we watched this transformation take, and we dropped violence in our neighborhood 86% in the last 3 years and around St. Sabina. So I say that only to say I know. a harder year of ministry in my life than this past year. Because this is the first year I had to tell somebody at the door I didn't have any food. It's the first year I had to tell some brother, I have no place to put you. You can sleep on the floor in my room, but I haven't got another studio apartment. I haven't got another one bedroom I can shove 3 and 4 and 5 guys into, because we've run out of the resources and we run out of the opportunities. So I tell someone, just please don't shoot. Just yesterday we talked to 2 guys on the corner who were into this tension with each other. And somebody called me out at 1:45 this morning. I ran over there because the guys, we hired 4 people to do this intervention on the streets for us who are former gang guys, and they've been great. But now I'm paying them out of my salary because the government cut off, the governor cut off all their resources. But last night we went to tell them, you got to stop this. Don't fall into the trap. Don't shoot each other. Don't resort to violence. I'll help you some way. This morning at 8:30 in the morning, my doorbell rang. And one of those 2 guys brought in 2 guns, and he said, I not know if I'm strong enough to not use him, so I'm turning them over to you. You turn them in. I know we can help our young people. I know we can deal with this violence thing, but we have to be willing to say, how do we do it? How do we give the resources? How do we make government and private and individuals and care as a church? How do we not walk past people and allow them to think that we don't care anymore? And then stereotype them. Stereotype them because we make some feel more important than others. It is amazing to me. I was talking to a woman I was marching with downtown right after the Newtown incident. And I said to this woman, I said, excuse me, ma'am, she lived up in Winnetka, and I said, can you help me? Can you tell me why now, with all the shootings and all the killings that are going on the south side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago, why now you're marching? And she looked at me and she said, when I saw those babies in Newtown, she said, I identify with my son and my daughter. I thought of them when I saw those babies. She said, but when I see a young person shot or killed on the west or the south side of Chicago, I don't identify with that. And I said, that's the tragedy. Because somehow we think that life, if they're black or they're brown or they're poor, is not a real human being, so we don't have the same kind of feeling about it as we do someone that looks just like myself. George Stephanopoulos has I know it's a different network, Dick, but there are other networks. George Stephanopoulos has a program every Sunday morning called This Week. At the end of that program, if you've ever watched it, he'll say, or whoever's doing the hosting that week will say, and now we remember the military that was killed this past week in America. And they'll scroll down names and the ages of the people, and that's all they say. They don't say whether they were black or they were white or they were Latino. They don't say whether they were Asian. They don't say if they were rich or poor, if they were gay or straight. They say nothing about them, but they were an American citizen who lost their life, and we mourn as a country. That's what we have to become to each other. We have to understand if there's any child hungry in America, that's our child. If there's any elder who feels forgotten in some senior home or in some street corner or in some apartment by themselves, that's our mother, our father. We have to get to a point where it's an American citizen that we're going to care about. Oh, we're great at carrying things over the seas in our missions. We're great at carrying overseas in our government. We will send people to bring peace in Iraq or Afghanistan, but we got to have peace in America. We got to have education in America. We got to have children be able to grow up in their dreams in America. We've got to have places in America where we're going to take care of one another. I'm not against taking care of the world. I just want to start at home because my mom said you ought to start at home taking care of yourself. We've got to make an America that cares for one another again and gives our children options. And we have to do that by coming together. We have to do that by coming together. We have to be a country that once again realizes that when any child is suffering in America, we all got an issue in America. I can't help thinking about the Ezekiel, the 37th chapter of the dry bones, when it says the Lord led Ezekiel the prophet out to the valley, and he said he saw bones scattered all over the place. They were lifeless and they were dry. And he said, can these bones live? And God said, what do you say? He said, God, I don't know that. I'm asking you. Only you would know if these bones can live. And God begins to tell him, prophesy to the bones, speak the word to them, and bring the bones together. He did that. He spoke the word about justice, the word about peace. He spoke about the word of God coming together. But it wasn't until the bones came together and he said, all right, they're connected now, but they're still lifeless. And then God said, prophesy my spirit upon them, breathe upon them. What that scripture tells us is that God's never going to throw his true power and his breath of anointing until we come together as people. We can't live in a divided world. It's amazing to me. You know, we live with more technology now than ever in the history of the world. We can text, we can email, we can tweet, we can Facebook, we can Instagram, and 1,000 other things we can all do. And yet, America has never been more divided. We now see people in restaurants. I see people in restaurants. How many of you ever sat in a restaurant and saw people at the table all on their cell phones? Yeah. That's a step toward divorce. Watch that. People in their cars on their cell phones or emailing or talking to one another. I have a policy in my car. When you get in my car, you cannot use your phone unless it's your parent calling. I have put people out of my car on the Dan Ryan Expressway for going to their phone. Because I still believe in the presence of human relationship. I still believe in a society where we care about each other and take care of one another and take care for each other. But we have all this technology, and yet we've never been more divided. Until we come together, God's never going to put out his breath. Pentecost, the Spirit didn't fall until they were unified in one room together. Paul tells us in Corinthians, until the body comes together and realizes its need for each other, the body can't function in the fullness of the body to which it was called. We have to build a society, and I challenge you and I challenge myself every day. We have to build a society again that has a conscience that cares and takes down all the walls and takes care of the barriers that cut us apart, so that there's not just differences of location of Hinsdale or St. Sabina, but there's differences of ideology and race and creed and racism and prejudice and all the things we have of each other. And then on top of that, we're taught to fear each other. There's a few other people in this room that might be close to my age, and you might remember the movie E.T. The movie E.T. had a frightening, but also had a very real story in the movie, when at one point the government says, we've got to catch this thing and either control it or kill it. Because that's the mentality we have of something we don't know and something that's different from us. We either fear it or we have to control it. We have to somehow be the people as a church, as Christians, who fight every day to say, how do we reconnect this broken body of Christ? How we can take all the bones that are scattered all over America and bring them back together so we can function together again as the body of Christ we've been called to be. How do we remove the walls? Robert Frost has that great poem, The Mending Wall, about what is it in the atmosphere that doesn't like a wall. The neighbors keep building it back up, and it keeps falling apart every year. And Robert Frost asks in that poem, what is it in the world that doesn't like a wall? The one in the world that doesn't like the wall is God. God doesn't like walls that separate us and disconnect us from each other and lay us in a valley of dry bones. God calls us to come together, and God calls us to come together as sisters and brothers and be the people God called us to be. Sisters and brothers, my charge to you is that there are people all over this city and this country who tonight are crawling up under a cardboard box, or a brother on a corner trying to get high with drink or drugs, or a woman who's trying to wonder how she's going to feed her kids tonight, or some man who's getting drunk or drugs, he doesn't know how he's going to take care of his children. There's somebody wondering what they're going to do when it gets cold, and where they're going to sleep, and where they're going to eat, and where they're going to go. And somehow we have to realize that that's our problem as a society. Whether it is in St. Sabina and the 79th Street, or whether it's somebody here in Hinsdale who feels forgotten and alone or abandoned, because it doesn't make any difference. We have people hurting all over. There's somebody tonight feeling unloved and feeling uncared for and forgotten and ignored by somebody. All you have to do is go to some senior home and begin to walk in and have somebody call you and say, can you talk to me a minute? Because they feel that their family has forgotten them or abandoned them. We have to somehow be uncomfortable and dissatisfied while there's somebody doing without in this world. If it's without food or housing or shelter, or without love or forgiveness or mercy. We have to become the people that say our very Christianity, the very Bible that we read and we preach and we teach from, calls us to be a people that care for one another and are willing to stop on the side of the road and pick somebody up, because the question haunts us like it did Dr. King. What if we don't? There was a great commercial out a couple of years ago by the ad console. And in this commercial at the ad console, it said, there's a voice that came over, saw a guy laying on the street. And there was a voice that came over and said, I almost brought Johnny a blanket tonight. I almost brought Johnny food tonight. I almost went and brought Johnny to a shelter tonight. And then there's a pause. And the next voice comes on and says, Johnny almost lived through the night. Sisters and brothers, I think what's happened in the community of the religion today, in the church today, is there's a whole lot of people who are suffering and struggling, and there's a whole lot of Christians who are almost Christians. I want to do more. I want to make a difference. I want to make a change. But somehow we find us still walking by the side of the road while somebody's laying there wondering, does anybody care about me? No human being in America, black, white, brown, rich, poor, young, old, gay, straight, child, should ever wonder, does anybody care about me? No human being deserves to feel that isolation and that loneliness. Let me close on this and we'll open up to questions. Some of us might remember I think it was about a year and a half ago, Dick would know because it was all on all the news. Remember there was that violin that was lost or stolen? It was worth $5 million. I looked everywhere in Chicago. I went downtown, I went in the train stations, I wanted that violin. What struck me was, about 4 or 5 days into it, the owner of the violin said, I read in the paper, they don't understand this violin is so priceless and such an expensive piece. If it's not played, if it's not touched, it will rot and become useless. And it struck that to me as a Christian, that we are much more valuable than a violin. The Bible says we're fearlessly and wonderfully made. The Bible says we're the apple of God's eye. We're more than conquerors. We're the head, we're not the tail. We're lenders, not borrowers. The Bible says we're the children of God. But the Bible also says we're to be used by God. And if we are not used, and if we are not touched, and if we are not played by God, then just like that violin, we're going to rot. Sometimes my greatest fear about religion in 2015 is our churches are filled and rotting because somehow we think what we do in here makes us church. And I think sometimes God looks at us and says, don't you understand? This does not make you my church. It's what you do when you leave here that makes you my church. I look at church all the time. It's like a football game. It's where we huddle. Nobody goes to the Bears to see a huddle. Well, nobody goes to the Bears at all. Right? But nobody goes to a team to see it huddle. What the people in the stands want to know is, what do you do when you come out of the huddle? What's going to be different on the field because you huddled? Every Sunday morning, all over the world, we huddle. And God's saying, what you going to do when you leave? Because there are people laying upon the side of life's road that are dying. And they're calling out the question, does anybody care? I pray that we as Christians can let them know, I do. Thank you.
Father Pfleger is going to take questions, and I'm going to go to wherever he points to bring a mic so that everybody can hear the question. So, well, I think it's live. Hello, is it sound coming out? It was a great talk, Father. Thank you.
Thank you.
I worked for the Cook County Department of Public Aid almost 50 years ago, and I wonder what role public aid is playing in the needs of the people now, in your area especially.
Well, one of the sad problems, a lot of it has been cut. I have a woman from my church. I'll tell you how rough it is right now in the state. And again, I know I'm out in Republican territory, but I'm going to still say what I believe. And I have never been more frightened. I loved George Ryan. I think he got a bad deal. I loved Jim Edgar, Jim Thompson. It's not about Democratic Republican, but I believe this governor we have right now does not care. And it hurts me because I watched a woman from my church who lost her child care. Pardon?
Louder.
Oh, a woman from my church who lost child care and had to stay home and take care of her kids until she could find a new place that could do it for that price. She couldn't find it, and then she lost her job. So public aid is being cut. The WIC centers now, which is major through the public aid system for women and children feeding, some of them are getting ready to close. People who were got an earn fare, which is a public aid thing where you worked so many hours and had to go look for a job, and then you got a stipend at the end of the month just to get some basic necessities on. That's now been cut. We used to have 24 earn fare workers. We're down to 6. So I am not one, and please let me make clear this, I am not one that believes that people should have to live off of government. I'm not a believer of that. But I do believe that government has a responsibility to take care of the most needy until they can get back on their feet. I just believe that responsibility is there. Help them get. I said to the governor, and we had a conversation. He said, well, I want to bring in businesses and so people can get jobs. I said, I'm with you 100%. But governor, until we get the business in, people need help to eat. So I have to eat while you're bringing in a business because ain't no businesses come in yet. So government has a responsibility for the most vulnerable of society. And so I know I grew up on government cheese. so I know that some people really are suffering and struggling and need help. And public aid is being cut. A question. Yes, ma'am.
Seems like the needs in the world are overwhelming to me as I listen to you, you know. So if you were to give me advice of something I could do tomorrow that would be helpful to you or in this immediate community, what would be something you would suggest? I really would like some more concrete direction.
Okay, good question. I would say 2 things immediately. And let me frame it in the answer of charity and response. I believe as Christians we're called to do charity. The Bible's clear, Matthew 25. When I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. When I was naked, you clothed me. I believe we have to do charity. So finding some place that you trust and you care about to help, if it's food cards, if it's bringing food down or whatever, some charity thing. But then it's also justice, because charity just keeps people getting band-aided. The other part of it is jobs. When we lost a lot of funding from the state for our employment center, we had our staff cut in half. So people that were out calling corporations and ringing doorbells and knocking, going to meetings, trying to find out about job opportunities to bring back and share with people, we lost all of that. So I would say 2 immediate things. I would say find some place that you can help with people with bus cards, with food, with just the basic needs for daily living. And if you know anybody here knows there's job openings where people can go apply for jobs and get word to us at our employment. Call me, call the church, we'll give you the employment number of our center to call and give where job openings are, job possibilities are, so we can get that to people, get that information, so they can get on their own feet. Nobody wants to stay begging. They want to get on their own feet. So those would be the 2 most immediate things I think we could do. And the charity end, food or money to help somebody, a studio to get other people in there, because it's about to get cold. I mean, we've been blessed this last week. It's been beautiful weather, but it's about to get cold. And folks who were in on the street or sleeping on benches are not going to have places to go in another month or two when it gets very cold in Chicago. Those are the two things. Yes, ma'am.
This is so much a question, but
Wait to the mic.
I thought I had a voice that projected. This isn't exactly a question, but this is something that I don't do enough of, but I do believe that it works and that we need to do more of, is to call our representatives and to call our people in Washington and in Springfield, because things in our state are appalling. I mean, I do believe that we need to take care of the least of these, and I think some people, not that I'm doing everything that I should be doing, but I get things through the email and I get things on the phone, and I really need to respond to more of them. And I think if we did talk to our legislators and let them know where we feel, we do a little better.
Absolutely right. And let me
me
tell you why that's so important. It's because number one, there is this tremendous, as you know, in Springfield isn't moving. It's like the federal government. The government, we should fire everybody, you know. Fire everybody. I mean, I'm presumed that there's some folks in here that if you didn't do your job, they'd fire you. Well, they haven't been doing their job for a long time. We keep paying them. And I don't understand that. We should ask everybody in Springfield, everybody in Congress. When I was at Congress yesterday to see the poll, afterwards I was in a room with about 7 or 8 Republicans and about 8 to 10 Democrats. And I was listening to them and I thought, none of you should have a job. None of you should be working. So we have to put pressure on them. You're absolutely right. Get a budget that has a concern for the poor. Yes, we want to be fiscally smart, and we don't want to just throw money away, but we want people to be cared about at the same time while we're paying off our debts as a state. The second thing, though, is the gun issue. And I must say, let me just clarify, because I often by the NRA get told that I'm this anti-gun person. I personally don't like guns. That's Mike Pfleger personally. I don't like guns. I would never allow my children to even have a play gun when they were growing up because I don't like that in their hands. But I'm not against people who want to rightfully own guns, because the Second Amendment we heard it interpreted as the right to bear arms, even though the British are not coming back. They're really not. They're not coming back, so feel safe from that. But what I have said is, why can't we make gun ownership responsible? And what I've fought for 10 years is title a gun like a car. If I give Bob a car and I don't transfer a title and he gets in an accident, who are they coming for? Me. Because it was my car. So I've just said, do the same thing with guns. Because we have people that can go to Chuck's gun shop in Riverdale right now and buy 100 guns, sell them on the street, legally buy them because they have their void card and whatever, and buy and sell it on the street. And if that gun comes up in a crime tomorrow, and they say, well, this was bought by Chuck's by Bob, you know, Bob is in a lot of trouble. And they can prove it. All Bob has to do is sign a thing saying, you know what? Somebody must have stole it last night, or I must have lost it somewhere, and he's not held responsible. You can't do that with a car. Why can you do that with a gun? So I just want to title guns like cars and make people responsible. The NRA keeps saying to me, well, the criminal is always going to get the gun. Yes, if you let the criminal get the gun. But I argued at an NRA meeting one time for the longest, and finally this guy afterwards pulled me out in a corner and he said, Pfleger, you don't get it, do you? And I said, obviously not. He said to me, guns, he said, number one consumer of guns in America now is the criminal element, the illegal element. So if you stop access to the illegal or to the criminal, it's called a business decision. It's less guns you have to sell or make. And then the manufacturers make less money, and they pay the gun lobbyists, so they make less money. So the easy access is a business decision. Just like when I was fighting years ago, Dick knows, the alcohol and tobacco, selling it to kids. It's a business decision. So all I want to do is make people responsible with guns. And until we get legislators who are willing to stand up and fight for that, Whether it's getting a budget together, we still don't have a budget in Illinois. Nobody's even talking about it anymore. Whether it's getting a budget, whether it's stuff that you believe in and vote for and push, and responsible ownership for guns, until we make our legislators do it, they're going to continue doing what they're doing right now, and in my mind, that's nothing. Yes, sir.
How do you handle people that are locked into discrimination?
Well, I first of all believe that we all have prejudice in us. Every last one of us. We grow up across tables, in families, in homes, where there's prejudice that's pushed into us, it's poured into us. And I think it demands all of us going through that, for lack of a better term, that come to Jesus moment, where we examine ourselves and say, let me look at the stuff in me. So when I see certain people, or I see certain situations, do I immediately get stereotyped thoughts in my mind? How do I eradicate that? One of the ways we eradicate it is, first of all, is facing it, acknowledging it. Second way to eradicate it is then getting the education to study and to learn about other people. But to me, the most important way of stopping is getting rid of it is by having experiences with other people, getting to know other people, break down the barriers. I'll never forget, I was a deacon in Glenview at OLPH Church in Glenview, Illinois in 1974, 75. Geez. And people ask me how long I've been at Sabinus. I said, well, when Jesus went to the cross, I came to Sabinus. That's how long I've been there. But in 74, 75, I was a deacon at Glenview. We started at that time, I started taking young kids from Glenview down to Madison Street, because Madison Street, remember, it used to be called Skid Row. And now I can't afford to eat on Madison Street, but that was Skid Row. I was bringing soup down there at that time, and now I can't buy soup there. But we would bring kids down there. I started doing it because I realized in the teen club, we had about 400 members. There was only 100 of my 400 who had ever been to downtown Chicago. They'd been to Europe, they'd been all around the world, but they hadn't been to downtown Chicago. So we started bringing kids in a bus. I drove the bus down every Friday night. We'd go down to Skid Row, we'd sit out tables, we'd pour out food, we'd bring things down. The first time we drove down there, I'll never forget the conversation on the bus while I'm driving the bus. I wonder what they'll be like. I wonder if they'll stink. I wonder if they'll touch me. I wonder how dirty. I wonder if they'll be drunk. I wonder if they'll be angry. All these questions on the bus. Within about 4 to 5 weeks, driving down there, I'm hearing things like, I hope Mary's going to be there. I bought gloves for her. I hope John's going to be there because I brought a coat for him tonight. I hope this person can be there because last week they weren't sick. I want to make sure they're feeling better. I brought some aspirin for them. What happened was the personal encounters didn't take the stereotypes of thoughts and prejudice, but now they were human beings. They were names. They were places. They were individuals. And those stereotypes broke away. I often say, it's so weird to me, when we're in unhealthy or emergency situations, if I need an ambulance, I don't care what color, race, creed, or gender the ambulance driver is, help me. When I need police or fire, I don't care what race, color, creed they are, just put out the fire or come because I have an emergency and need a police officer. If I'm in a senior home and I can't get out of bed, I don't care the race, the creed, the color, the prejudice, whatever it is, just come help me get out of bed or bring me to some food. When we are most unhealthy or in crisis, we seem to act most healthy with each other. And when we're most healthy, we seem to act most sick with each other. And the only thing I think is going to break that is experience. We live in our own little silos today. Think about parenting. And I don't know your neighborhood, so I can't speak about it here, but I'm just speaking about the city where I know, and not just the black community, but the white community too. But we never had Dr. Phil's or Oprah's that gave us shows about how to raise our children. We didn't have that stuff. Our parenting classes were over the backyard fence. Our parenting class, we're taking out the garbage or sitting on the porch where people in the block shared and talked to one another. When my mother was ready to kill me, thank God Miss Boyd next door told her, oh, he'll get over that. I did that with my daughter, and she's gotten fine now, and she's good. Don't worry about that. That was our parenting classes. Now we live in these silos. We don't talk and we don't share. We're our own backyards, and we don't have that kind of fraternity and fellowship. We need to change that. But not just in our community or our block or our neighbor, with the city. How can we have all this technology and be so disconnected? So disconnected from one another. So we have to break down the stereotypes, break down the prejudices by education, by acknowledgement and self-purification, and by experience. Yeah. Yeah.
Probably don't need it. Okay. Father, we're realtors in town.
You're
And
what? I'm sorry.
We're realtors in town, and it seems that most of the people I'm working with now, it's the end of their life. So they're either passing on or they're going to nursing homes. So I have these housefuls of furniture, dishes, so on and so forth. Okay, can you hear me? Anyway, today I finished emptying a home, and a ministry from Harvey came. They were thrilled. They took every piece of furniture out of there. They were wonderful. Is there any need? Well, there is a need in your community. How can we contact you folks? I mean, there's dishes, there's pots, there's food.
Right.
Pantries are full.
Well, yeah, we definitely have the need. Obviously, the only thing with furniture we have is, because I have a very limited staff, is that we have to, if people sometimes say, we have some furniture, if we need it out here by tomorrow or the next day, we can't do that, because I have to get the money to pay the Smith movers that we will have to pay them to get the truck to go pick it up and bring it, because I don't have that kind of staff like that I can send 2 or 3 people on a truck, and I don't have a truck. So yes, we need it. You know, somebody just recently, similar to a situation, they had just bought a home, and it had been redone, but they wanted to redo it their own way. So it was brand new refrigerator, it was a brand new dishwasher, it was brand new kitchen table. And so I said, I need about a week and a half to, number one, get the truck, and number two, get the money to pay for the truck. If you can give me that time. And we could, so we went and picked it up. And in the meantime, we were calling around different families. We have a list of things different families are on waiting list for. And then when we get it, they'll come right there with their car or their truck or their van or whatever to pick it up. So certainly it can be, and food anytime.
You have a place for storage of furniture for
We have a limited place for storage, but what we try to do, sir, is again, when we know what we're going to get, to try to have people who are ready, so the day we bring it, they're ready to get it. So there's no sense in me storing it someplace if I know somebody needs it right now. Yeah, so, and food, literally anytime. Our food pantry consistently. We've partnered with Feed the Children, which is this international organization that helps feed children and feeds families. And they did it last year. They wanted to come back and this year. And on Wednesday, we gave food out to 800 families. Well, we give vouchers out, which we did several days, several weeks in advance. People picked up the vouchers that we know are in need, so it's not just, throw them out, but people who are on the list of need in the community. We had 800 vouchers we gave out. At the end of Wednesday afternoon, when the vouchers were all being used up, there was about 10 that didn't show up. I don't know what happened. The doctor's sick, couldn't get out, whatever. We had 250 more people waiting in line that we couldn't help. So we had to tell them we just don't have any more. We took care of a few, and then that was all we could do. So there's always a need.
So the thing we need to do is pack up the food and bring it to you.
If you can get it to us, that's great. I mean, our social service center on 79th Street, open Monday through Friday, anytime from 8 in the morning. Or the other thing, you're not close to Glenview, but Glenview helps drive stuff down. So you can get it to there. But, getting it to us is the best. I just don't have the pickup staff. Yes, thank you. He's getting somebody to stand there. I'll get you next.
Father, you've talked a lot about what you would term charity, and given the crisis in the community, I understand that's pretty overwhelming. Can you spend a minute talking about what your vision would be for what I'd call a longer-term solution? Because when we work with homeless in DuPage County, a lot of it is lack of role models, a lack of kind of confidence and aspiration, and certainly a lot of cases, a lack of a family structure. And if you think about longer term, can you give me your vision of how you would see that?
Sure. Obviously, I believe that the answer is comprehensive, is all of the above. It's helping young people make right decisions and value themselves and know themselves and love themselves. It's helping parents be better parents and giving them the support. It's silly for me to just say, you need to be a better mother. Well, help her be a better mother. You know what I mean? It's got to be the support and the wraparound that helps. We can't just tell people to do something, because if they could do it, they'd be doing it now. They need the help and the support and the instruction and the wraparound of that fabric of society that's not there anymore, where a kid could go next door, you know, if somebody wasn't home. There was always 3 or 4 people on the block that you had relationship with. So it's building up the family, building up the home, building up the child. But it's also been the resources. Here's one of my problems is that while I'm trying to help the mother or the father or the family, they're saying to me, okay, Father Mike, I get that, but I need food tonight to eat. So while I'm in an emergency situation, you know, when you're out in the water and you're drowning, you're just saying, I need to get to shore. You're not wondering, you know, why you dressed right, do you have the right bathing suit on, and, you know, how you should use the breaststroke, or you're going to use a, dog paddle. Get me to shore, because I don't want to drown. And one of the things I'm realizing right now, while it's this comprehensive issue, jobs, and I look, for instance, you talk about a long-term issue, I look at tons of boarded up housing in our community. And I get so angry at the number one slum landlord in my neighborhood is Bank of America. Number one slum landlord in my neighborhood. And they don't take care of the homes. They don't keep them boarded up. They put people out of homes who, if they could have worked out a payment plan to keep them in, my thing is keep them in and get some money, because you're not getting any money when it's empty. But start a program with the unions, train people how to fix up home, and you fix it up, and then you can come into that home, and then you have to get the job to help take care of it and live in the house and be productive again, pay taxes again. But I have all these boarded up homes or unboarded up homes in my neighborhood. It makes some blocks look like a third world country, and there's no resources to help them. You go to the bank and you got, I don't know how many bankers in here, but I'm not a big fan of bankers. Because in the banks, because I've gone from the church, to get a loan, you almost have all the money already before you can get a loan. So when you have all these ceilings and these door closures and these barriers in the way, it's hard to do the long-term thing when you're just trying to say tonight, all right, I got you some place. There's literally days when I'm going to bed at night where it's just trying to say, okay, let me just right now get you some place to stay tonight. We'll worry about tomorrow night tomorrow. Let me get you some food for you and your baby today. We'll find out what I can do through social service to get you some food to eat for the rest of the week. Sometimes it's just that emergency crisis. I said I have a spiritual director who's been my spiritual director since back in high school, and he's a retired priest now. And I've called him up twice in the last 6 months and said, Ed, I'm fighting depression, because all day long from 6 in the morning until I go to bed at 12 or 1, all I'm doing is having people in emergency crises, and I don't have the emergency resources to help them now. Our food pantry feeds 35,000 people a year, and we constantly keep running out of food. So I'm trying to say, how do we get you? My theme is always brush the dust off your dreams and help you achieve them. But sometimes now it's just trying to feed your dream to keep it alive today. So the long term is absolutely necessary from the home structure and the house, but the crisis mode is I've never seen worse than it is right now. So it's hard to talk about how do we build the family up when a mother's saying, how do I put my lights on? I know if that re-answer, that's the best I can do. I'm sorry, you had a question, but.
This is my mom, and we were fighting over who got to ask you a question. So I'm a guest in this church, but I grew up in the western suburbs. So thanks for having guests, and thank you for coming all the way out here.
I'm a guest too.
Yes. So I was wondering, a criticism that I've heard of sort of once we get to the point of action, as maybe if I can just self-proclaim a white progressive in the suburbs. A criticism I've heard of me is sort of this top-down approach, like we know the best solution for those people over there at St. Sabina's or whatever. And I just really struggle with this, the best practice for encountering, because I love talking to Mary and John and what you're talking about, but I think when we're working as a community with other communities, sometimes it's hard to figure out how to listen for their own solutions and hear the wisdom there. So I think I'm asking for maybe practical ways you've seen this work really well in partnership. That's my question.
Pardon? What did you say?
I say send the money to St. Sabina.
Yeah, you can always help us out. But I think the other practical thing is I don't want to just, I'll be the first to say, yeah, we need resources. There's no question about that. I'm dying out there right now. There's no question about that. But the other thing is we got to break down the barriers, and I do that whenever we can. Sometimes it's, and I'd be more than happy as any. I know there's different churches involved here, but anytime the group of folks here from any of the churches say, well, we'd like to come down for a service one Sunday at Sabina's and then sit afterwards and have, break some bread together and talk and listen to each other's stories or talk to one another and get to know each other. I'm willing to do anything like that. It's easier if I can bring people down, because sometimes it's painful for the first thing if people come up and they see like an atmosphere or a neighborhood and saying, God, my neighborhood doesn't look anything, feel anything like this, and it's painful then getting on that bus going back. So if we can start the barrier breaking coming into our home and into our community, and breaking down some of those barriers. So it's both and. It's a charity thing, and it's breaking down barriers, and then helping me through the legislators or through whatever to change some of the structure that's keeping people in this situation. It's crazy to me. In 2015, 40 years at St. Sabina, and I see conditions worse now than then. It's just crazy to me to think, I look at myself like, what have you been doing for 40 years? If I work 7 days a week, I take no days off. As some of y'all know, if you've seen TV, I scream, I yell, I holler. Somebody come up to me tonight and said to me, oh, you don't look as angry as when I see you on TV. I feel like I'm a madman. But I am. And usually when they see me or when somebody like Dick Johnson is covering me, I'm angry about some issue. But I'm really a nice guy. I really am. But I'm usually angry when it's talking about jobs or talking about racism or talking about poverty I do get angry because it's my passion, because I know that when we finish here tonight, I'm going to drive back to 79th Street, and there's going to be somebody sitting at my door. There's going to be two guys waiting outside who's sleeping on my floor tonight. I know I'm going to have to deal with all that. And I'm angry about that. And so we have to change the structure that creates it. Not just pick the bodies up in the water, but who's putting them in the water. But we also have to do the emergency crisis, because, if I'm bleeding to death, stop the bleeding first, and now we can talk about healthy eating. But don't tell me about greens when I'm bleeding to death. I'll still go get some pizza. Yeah, can I ask this lady here ask too? Could you just real quick, and then we'll come to you.
Yeah, I can talk loudly. My question to you is...
I'll repeat it.
Okay, good. Okay, so my question to you is, if people want to come and volunteer at St. Sabina, because you have a big campus, a lot of different places that people could help, what would be...
If people want to come and volunteer, there's many opportunities. There's a social service center, which is food and clothing and all that, and emergency crisis help and the rest. Third is our employment center, which is not just the training, but the main theme of employment center is getting jobs, finding foundations that help to support the getting of jobs and getting the people into place. There's the youth building, our youth center that we run there. There is the school. You know, we have 270 children in our school. Somebody said, well, I just like to tutor. I like to, help with math, or I like to help with the computers, and, So there's many ways, in the place to get involved. So somebody says, well, I'd like to do something, and this is, I always ask people, what's your passion? What's your passion? Because it's best if you're doing something you enjoy doing.
And I do know a lot of people are afraid of
And a lot of people are afraid. Let me tell you something. I would like to say that I live in Disneyland, but I don't. But I would also say that, that people come down all the time at St. Sabina. I live there. I've lived there for 40 years. Nothing has ever happened to me. My greatest hate has happened outside of the black community. I have been spit on. I've been kicked. I've been called an end lover. I've been beaten up outside of Ford City. All my greatest injuries have taken place outside. But our area is safe. We're 7 minutes off the Dandelion Expressway. But I understand that people that feel not safe yet, and that's why I say, well, come down sometime if they just want to get to know or meet people. They can come down someday. I'll be glad to set up a time, bring people, show them all of our different, our employment center, our social service center. I mean, there's people that come down there all the time, and nothing has ever happened to anybody. There's a lot of, the Cardinal has often wished something would happen to me down there, but nothing has happened to me yet. I'm still alive. I'm sorry, go ahead, right here first.
I'm the pastor of the Lutheran Church just that way, and every single Saturday night in the summer, we host the PAD shelter, where we have, at capacity, 60 people. Every single Saturday, we have to turn people away because we don't have room for them to sleep. It's mostly families and single men. The good news about PADS is, of course, that every year they manage to get most of those families into housing. So we have had no repeats this summer from last. But we have Sundays or Saturdays that are open that are not covered, and we need churches to volunteer to take those nights. So you want to do something locally that makes a difference, that's hands-on. We've got a meeting on Thursday, and I need you to come sign up, or Union will get the 4th of July. So, do I have commitments? Is someone going to come? Good. I'll see you there.
Excellent.
And Father, thank you so much for coming and speaking this word of promise and peace to us. It's like having our own little audience with the Pope, huh?
Thank you. Him and then you, sir. Yes.
Well, I'd like to say I was coming down to St. Sabina since 1996.
Right.
And it's one of the best trips I've ever made. One of the most thankful things in my life that we were able to do together, starting back in 1996. And so it's a trip I love, That's all I can tell you.
Thank you, Paul.
And I've always felt very much at home in the few minutes we spend together.
Right.
Not often enough, but,
Right.
I love it.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Thanks very much. Is it man here?
What is your relationship and experience with the Chicago Police Department?
What's my relationship with the Chicago Police Department? It's mixed. And let me say it this way, is that I believe police have a very difficult job, no question about it. But I also believe that police have a responsibility, because you've chosen that job, to be professional at all times. And so when I see a police officer jump out of a car, or go up to a car, or just stop some guys in the street, and his opening words are MF, I have a problem. In my district, I tell the police superintendent this all the time. I just talked to McCarthy this afternoon. And in my district, we took a group of the TAC unit, which is the detectives mostly on the street. And I sat with them and said, I want to do a basketball game between the cops and the gang, because they're the most interacting with each other, where there's most conflict. The gang guy said, I don't know if I'll meet with them. The cops said, no, we don't want to meet with them. I said, well, the gang guys are open to it. They have some hesitation too, you know. But would you be willing to? They said, fine. So we had a game of basketball together. And then the deal was afterwards, they said, we'll go downstairs and sit in the room. I'll pay for pizza and pop. Open conversation, everything on the table. I had police and brothers from the street crying at that meeting. But the most eye-opening thing to me was the police officer that kept saying, I'm going to keep using Bob here. They kept saying to Bob, well, you're good. You're talking to me. We're having a conversation, and you're not screaming at me, and you're not mad at me. And so you got to go tell your brothers. That's how they need to treat me on the street. Treat me with respect on the street. And he said that about 4 or 5 times. And Bob finally said to the police officer, you've said this to me consistently. I'll go talk to my guys in the corner if you go talk at the next roll call meeting to your guys. The cop said, I understand, because I'm not going to do that. So that's my issue with the police. With the police officer comes out, I was standing in my yard. I'll tell you 2 quick instances. Standing in my yard, 11 o'clock at night, finished watching the news. I won't say what station. And then came out in the yard with the dog. I have a Cocker Spaniel. I've always had dogs. I have a Cocker Spaniel, and the name of the dog is Justice. So I have to say Justice 100 times a day to get it in my heart and my mind. So I'm out in the yard with Justice, and I see 4 guys who had just left out of my gym, standing on the corner outside of the gym talking, just playing basketball, in shorts, T-shirts. I see 2 cars pull up, grabbing them, throwing them on the hood of the car, handcuffing them, and called them MF at least 5 times that I could hear. Roughed them, pushed them, all this kind of crazy stuff. And I'm watching this whole thing. So I finally finished, all right, go, and just stay out of trouble, and UMFs and I'm watching this. So I told the brothers, go ahead, go. And they said, Father Mike, I said, just go on, just go on. I called the sergeant who was part of the group over. I said, can I talk to you a minute? He said, what do you want? I said, what I want is, first of all, I know those 4 guys, and none of their first or second names are MF. Number 1. Number 2, why did you stop and run out of the car? You broke procedure by not saying to him why you were stopping them, why you were asking him to turn around. You asked him nothing. You grabbed him and threw him against the car and handcuffed him for no reason. Well, we got to put fear back into these kids in the street today. I said, sir, you didn't put fear back in them. You put hate in them. And the problem is, because the next time they see a cop, they're remembering you. And now they're going to come with that attitude. This guy turns to me and he says, why don't you do the church thing and I'll do the street thing? I had another incident, very similar, where I saw a cop on the street throw somebody against a building, and as I'm driving down the street, so I stopped to watch it. So I knew that guy too. Hit his head against a thing till it cut his face. Nothing on him, no reason to stop him. Had the same conversation with him. He told me to keep moving or he'd arrest me for interfering with police business. So, and I'm not saying that the brothers on the street don't act wrong to police too. I'm not saying that. But I tell my staff at the church, Corey Williams is my office manager. He's the first person when people walk in that door every day. And I tell Corey, I don't care if somebody comes in here angry, mad, frustrated, curses you out. You work for me. So you treat them with respect, and you tell them, can you calm down? And you tell them, can you stop cursing at me? You do whatever you have to do. And then if it gets out of hand, you ask them to leave, or you tell them you have to contact the police. But you, I'm paying to be respectful. So I believe that the police officer has an obligation to be professional. And if you can't do that, then get out of that field. But don't disrespect young people and expect them to respect you just because you have a badge and a gun, because our young people today, they're not afraid of that. So it depends on the officer. And it's just like there's a pastor over at Lutheran Church. It's the same thing with priests or pastors. Depends on how you're treated. You know, we have to treat each other right. And I drill my kids in the school with that. I drill my teenagers with that. I tell them no matter what anybody does to you, no matter what anybody does to you, just do what they tell you and we'll fight it later. I have 6 complaints against police officers right now of kids who I said I'd fight with it later for them. So I'm a great supporter of law enforcement, but I want law enforcement to also be a supporter of good policing.
Thank you, most of all, for coming. I think it's been a wonderful thing for all of us to hear.
Thank you for having me.
What would you like older white suburbia to do first?
I'm an old white city person, so nobody's old. I'm 66. Nobody's old. What would I like them to do? The things I mentioned. If they can help with food or with financial support, great. If they can help with jobs, fine. If they can come down and volunteer, great. If they can help with legislative, whatever area you feel. My thing is like this. And I don't know who mentioned earlier that you can be overwhelmed with all the depth of problems out here. Just find the one thing that person can do. If everybody just does a little, I am really a firm believer that we have more than enough jobs, homes, and food. We just don't do well as a society in sharing. And there's a mentality that if I help you, I'll have less. That's so unscriptural. The covenant relationship with Abraham was be blessed and be a blessing. We have to be conduits, not cul-de-sacs. We have to learn how to let it come through us, and God will continue to bless us. It makes, and I say this only because I know it with all my heart, there's no way in the world Sabina's should still be open. When I came there, we had 80 people. It was said to close in 3 years. In 2015, we're financially struggled from paycheck to paycheck. I haven't been paid for the last 3 paychecks, trying to pay for other people. But we're still open. We're the largest Black Catholic church. We run an employment center, a social service center, a school, a senior building, an apartment building for homeless, and a beloved community, and all this is going, and every week I ask God, how the hell are you doing this? But it happens. So I believe if we all just share some, everybody can make it all right, but we have to understand that we're all responsible for each other. That's the issue. And we live so cut off, that we don't see it every day. And so we forget about it, And so I remember one night I was downtown. Spike Lee, as you know, was in filming this movie. And one night I was driving him back, and he says, Mike, let's get a bite to eat. So we got a bite to eat, and we're sitting at I don't even remember the restaurant, but it was on someplace downtown. They had one of those outdoor cafes, and we sit there and eating. I'm going to get emotional to talk about this. Let me get myself together here. So we ate, took him to his hotel, and I drove back. I got off the expressway at 75th and went up to 76. I'm coming down 76th Street, and there had just been a shooting. And there's this young kid who had been shot, and his mother's out there, and she's crying and she's screaming. And where I just was, there was people laughing and talking, and street filled with people, and waiting line in the restaurant. And now I see blood on a curb, and I see a child laying there, and I say, Mother. And I said, it's just not right that within 20 minutes, there's 2 different worlds. We've got to, what did Jesus say in his opening sermon? The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He's anointed me to bring good news to the poor, freedom to the captives, sight to the blind, release to the prisoners. He said, we got to level the playing field, make the crooked straight. He told us we had to make the rough smooth and level the mountains and fill in the valleys. We got to do this. We got to do this. We've got to hear that haunting voice of that kid saying, does anybody care? None of us in here can change the world. But, the Bible says if we bring one person to Christ, heaven rejoices. I believe if we help one person survive, heaven rejoices. We all just do something. That's all.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Pardon me? Get going. Says last question? Okay.
Well, I wanted to make a comment as much as ask a question, but what has been asked now is what can we do? As realtors, we see people with estates now, and this is what Lucy was talking about. We just helped empty a whole estate of furniture and so forth. People who are beginning to downsize or moving into senior housing, you have closets full of bedding and things like that that probably we haven't used in years. And part of your downsizing, if you look at things like that and then be in touch with Father Pfleger or someone who can handle the transportation to these locations and so forth, that's how we can help with what we have in our homes today. Not dollars necessarily out of our pocket, although I'm sure he'd be welcome to that too.
I'll take anything.
And food, but the clothing and the linens that we just see thrown out because nobody wants them. And there are people who need them desperately. So if you have things like that, you can downsize, maybe a good help.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, that's a really great question because we have a donation plate outside here. All of the proceeds this evening will be going directly to St. Sabina. So if you'd like to help, we'll probably, so you don't have to go home with a pile of cash, a bag of cash. We'll put it in
That
check.
probably wouldn't be good.
We'll put it in check form and get it to you. So we'll be happy to do that. Right. So it's right out here. It says donations. So please do that this evening, free will offering for St. Sabina specifically. St. Sabina. So in the interest of time, I just feel so blessed that you were with us this evening.
Thank you.
You are not only entertaining, you're exactly who I expected you to be.